EU's own survey exposes cracks as 75% of citizens not happy with Brussels' dismally poor. Brussels' latest EU-wide survey is a hammer blow for European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, with the results dismally poor for the bloc, not least as it shows more than three-quarters of its citizens are dissatisfied with how it currently operates, UK-based analysts have said. Experts from Facts4EU pored over the EU's spring Eurobarometer, published last week. And despite the bloc's attempt to put a positive spin on the results, the pro-Brexit think tank pointed to a distinctly underwhelming verdict on its performance thus far, as well as the glaring omission from the research of any questions about Brexit and its impact. Asked to choose the statement which most closely reflected their opinion, just 23% of all EU 27 citizens chose, "I'm in favour of the European Union as it has been realised so far," a drop of 4% compared with the previous survey. For some countries, the results were even worse. In Italy and Greece, for example, just 15% of respondents chose the option. Facts4EU editor-in-chief Lee Evans said, "One of the dangers of asking people what they think of you in an anonymous survey is that people might just tell you. And that is what the citizens of the EU 27 countries have just done to the EU. As ever, we are in awe of the EU's abilities to spin bad news." He added, "Despite this survey and its calamitous results for the EU's High Command, Facts4EU, org continues to believe that the EU will muddle on somehow, at least for now." It must be remembered that the majority of EU countries have always been net beneficiaries of EU money, a great deal of which came from the UK. They would have been fools for turning this down, and they didn't. The EU's largesse with British people's money, and that of the other few net contributors to the EU budget, has been compulsorily badged as coming from the EU Commission, on plaques and signage throughout all EU countries. Mr. Evans explained, "Readers will have seen evidence of this in the UK for many years, despite the fact that this was in effect UK money, rebadged by the EU, and of which only a part was returned in the form of donations to local projects in the United Kingdom. That said, things are perhaps going to start changing. For example, Ireland, one of the most pro-EU countries, is now a net contributor to EU funds after decades of being a net beneficiary. We don't believe that this has yet sunk in the Republic, but when it does, Irish citizens might start to become more skeptical." In conclusion, despite all the EU's propaganda and despite our firm belief that the majority of those bothering to take part in these lengthy EU surveys are pro-EU, the results are dismally poor for the EU. Facts4EU also points to the fact that less than half of those surveyed, 48%, had a positive image of the EU, with only 7% having a very positive one. In Austria, just 34% regarded the EU in a positive light. Just 6% were optimistic about the bloc's future, with almost half, 49%, thinking it was going in the wrong direction. There was further bad news in relation to the bloc's much criticized coronavirus response. Only 48% of EU citizens were satisfied with the measures taken by Brussels, with less than half even knowing what the EU has been doing about it. Just 44% of EU citizens were satisfied with the degree of cooperation between member states in combating COVID. When asked about what the EU should prioritize in tackling this crisis, nearly 40% of EU citizens identified rapid access to safe and effective vaccines as the most crucial issue. Meanwhile, 29% said the EU should put more money into the development of treatments and vaccines. There were also no questions related to the impact of Britain's decision to quit the bloc, despite the UK having represented 13% of its population and having contributed 15% of its GDP. A press release commenting on the results and issued by the European Commission last week said, 8 out of 10 respondents know what the EU is doing to tackle the pandemic's consequences, while citizens put public health, the fight against poverty, supporting the economy and jobs, as well as tackling climate change at the top of their priorities for the European Parliament." Overall, the European Parliament's spring Eurobarometer survey shows robust support for the European Union, as well as broad consensus that global challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic are best tackled at EU level. A total of 26,999 EU citizens from 27 EU countries were interviewed between March 16 and April 12 for the Eurobarometer survey.